make sure you go see work that is from the Black community, from the Asian community, from the queer community, from the Indigenous community. When we're able to do that again, go see the work and support the work. Support those artists by going to see their work, because I'm required as an actor in this industry to know everyone. In the past, it wasn't really a requirement for a white actor to understand who was out there in the BIPOC community.
Then let's take a bit of a turn in a different direction, and that's towards education. What should we be teaching the next generation of artists and creators and thinkers? What should their dramatic history be like? And how are we currently training young artists or people in schools to look at classical theater?
My daughter, Tara Skye, just recently graduated from NTS. I've also taught at Humber. I've taught at the Center for Indigenous Theatre. I used to run that program. So as an artist educator, I would say one of our biggest failings is that we're requiring, it's been certainly based on tokenism, absolutely. So come into our system, come into our training programs, but you must do things within the structure that has already been created, because that's what we know and that's what we know how to teach. There certainly has been a shift in the last little while, though. I know that, like the George Brown Media Program, I was on their advisory for a number of years. They looked quite deeply at not only how to encourage a diverse student body, but then also how is that reflected in the curriculum? You know, that's an ongoing process for them for sure, but I know that they're working really hard. They've supported a deaf actor going through their program. They're looking at ways to ensure that when you're coming here as an artist, what you want to do is you want to find out what kind of artist you are. And the role of the artist educator is to, you know, really gently pull out that artist from within the body of that artist, and to be able to go deeper in. That does require a shift in curriculum for the majority of our organizations. One of the really beautiful things when Diana Belshaw and Paul de Jong were running Humber College, and I was working there, we had a very multicultural group, and they came back from the Theatre Ontario auditions, and I was asking them how they felt they did, and they were very proud of themselves. And they said, and I said, well, that's great. Why do you think that is? And they said, because we feel that we're better actors because we've learned from each other. As a very multicultural group, we've learned from each other. We've taught each other about each other. We've learned about ourselves through each other, and we feel that we're better actors as a result of that. And I've never forgotten that, because I feel that, to me, that's where we need to go back to that. We need to grow from that. We need to ensure that we're training artists and not actors.
Again, the sort of tokenism that we've seen in our PWIs has also existed in the schools that are also PWIs. I love teaching. I love working with theater students. They have so much hope, and they've never heard of IATSE. It's really lovely. I'm astonished every time at the burn of potency in them, the potential for things to be different. They have the energy from that. They haven't had their hearts broken repeatedly and repeatedly. Recently, this has intensified, is that there's a real interrogation of what are we actually being equipped to do? Why are we doing restoration comedy when we've never done a piece by a writer of color? And when I come in as a guest teacher, I'm I cannot answer that, but it makes me wonder what I'm doing here. And I'm seeing theater schools step up as well. I mean, I'm seeing theater schools accept the invitation into a new round of conversations. I think there was one round of conversations about who is being admitted to these schools, and now there's the round of conversations about what systems are being designed to support those students and what are they learning. The other provocation that I think I would have for theater schools is that I feel like the tokenist impulse is still very much alive and well, because the places where you see the most visible diversity in those schools is also the most visible roles in theater. It's often in the actors and to a lesser extent the directors, but the active recruitment in the less visible sides of the theater, in design, in tech, in production management, we are just seeing less students being recruited and brought into those. And, you know, Jani and I have talked about trying, like, the challenges of finding, you know, indigenous designers in any of the design disciplines. There are very few. There's some very gifted ones in Canada, but there are not a lot of them. And we are not training artists to hold different spaces in our creative teams. And so there's a shortage in the industry of people who can hold those spaces in a more holistic way, because, you know, an actor goes away to a fitting with a designer, and if that becomes a predominantly white space, then there's the possibility of harm, or there's at the very least a reproduction of the hierarchy that exists in the fitting room. And so it's the beyond changing curriculums, which I think is very essential, it's also changing an approach to recruitment, so that the generation of professionals moving forward is actually holding positions of power and positions with systems change potential, in all sort of aspects of the system. On
the high school level, with our arts programs and our art schools, I've had lots of conversations with you know, heads of departments, heads of theater departments, who are concerned about appropriation. So, you know, the great thing about taking something like Shakespeare and indigenizing it, or, you know, putting it through a queer lens or whatever, is that we can do that. But it's a bit more complicated, especially right now in terms of dialogue, to have a predominantly white cast or a multicultural cast do the Res Sisters in high school. And lots and lots of discussion around, can we? Should we? What is that? Is that appropriation? Is that weird? How do we support that? How do we look at training institutions and, you know, potentially support the idea of a group of multicultural or predominantly white students doing, you know, some of Janet Sears' work, and I will guarantee that there are lots in the community that disagree with me, but I feel that that is the time to do it. When you're in a training situation and you're training actors, that's a great time to have a bunch of young actors do the Res Sisters, or one of Marie Clemence's plays. That gives them the opportunity to do the research on what the worlds were, the worldview is, the circumstances, the research and the history that you would do with any other character. Outside of a theater and training session is when it gets very complicated, and for me jumps into appropriation. But when we're looking at training, I just really feel strongly about the fact that that's the time to go in and go, yeah, let's bring in those plays. Let's do those plays. Let's produce those plays. Let's have our white students play Indigenous characters and Black characters under the guise of training. I know that it's happening to a certain extent, but the fear around appropriation and the fear around white students playing Black characters or Muslim characters or Indigenous characters is a common conversation right now.
There's possibilities inside of that. Tanisha Tate talks a lot about her work with students at George Brown and the first year scene study class, and you know, the nervousness from some of her white students when she is saying, no, you're going to do some August Wilson right now. Yeah, you're playing a Black character. It's a scene study. We're not profiting off of it. And like, Tanisha is also the kind of facilitator who can hold that space, yeah, and continue to support the students through that challenge that she's posing to them. And I think, you know, a lot of that fear comes from the fact that, like, a lot of teachers have not been asked to hold the space and navigate the ethics around that. And you don't have to navigate as many ethics when you do Morris Panish's 7 Stories with high school students, you know.
Which my daughter did several times over the course of her training.
I also did that in high school. Yeah.
I mean, just saying.
This is only the start of the conversation. It's never the end. And if people watching this want to read further and learn further, what are some places they can start?
A lot of the conversations that I follow most closely and have participated in as well are happening on HowlRound. I think they're an incredible resource for discussions specifically around the intersections of identity and marginalization and the economics of theater and the organization of the sector. I think they have amazing essayists and writers from across the continent and also around the world. There's always
where's that
really
kept?
great dialogue there. HowlRound?
HowlRound.
Yeah, HowlRound Theater Commons. I think it's howlround.com.
Just writing that down.
Yeah, it's a great platform for conversation, and they have like webinars, and they've been they've been leading a lot of really great conversations since the pandemic hit. They pivoted pretty quickly, and can shameless plug that the Stratfest Lab also had a series published on there a few months ago. We had some really amazing artists who were guests doing work and asking some questions about canon in the lab, and produced a short series there.
So years ago, I remember walking into one of my first big sort of mainstream theater experiences, and a little nervous because I've struggled with my own self-worth in terms of because I bought into the bullshit that I wasn't worthy of being there. And I really had to have a little chat with myself and convince myself otherwise. But, you know, my first day was like, wow. But one of the things that I realized on my first day of that rehearsal was that I knew every single actor in that room. I had seen them in probably, well, not all of them. Some of them were from Quebec, or some of them were from Newfoundland, and I wasn't quite aware of all of their work, but I knew all of them. And before I had walked into the room, I did research on all of them, and I tried to figure out who I was working with, and I got to know them just through their online profiles. There were very few people in that room who knew who I was, who had heard of my work. And one of the things that struck me was that where all the people of color who were in the group, we all knew each other, and we all knew the white actors, and we had seen them all do a lot of plays, or at least had seen some of their work, whereas very few of them had ever seen any of our work. So when we are up and again, go see the work. Make sure you go see work that is from the Black community, from the Asian community, from the queer community, from the Indigenous community. When we're able to do that again, go see the work and support the work. Support those artists by going to see their work, because I'm required as an actor in this industry to know everyone. In the past, it wasn't really a requirement for a white actor to understand who was out there in the BIPOC community doing work. They weren't coming to see it. They weren't interested in it. They had no reason. They felt they had no reason to do that. And so know who's out there. In the interim of that, there's lots of places to go online in terms of just going to theater companies, looking at past productions. This is now the time to inform yourself in terms of the work that Modern Times has done, who's been in their shows, you know, the work that's happened at Buddies, who's run those theater companies, what shows have been there. Now's, you know, now if you're not working, this is a great time to do it. There's also some great resources through Playwrights Canada Press where Rick Knowles and Monique Mojica and Yvette Nolan have put together a series of books. It's certainly from an Indigenous stream about ways of working, Indigenous ways of working, or plays, or like now's the time to do the research, so that when this opens, all of us have a deeper understanding of each other, so that we're ready to actually jump into those rooms and work together. And so what I'm trying to do for myself right now is use my time to sharpen my tools, to get to know people that I don't know, to look at things online that I may not have had a chance to see. It's just a great time to really take a deep dive into educating ourselves about who's out there and what kind of work is happening. The thing that I think is essential for all of us. We need to get to know each other better if we're going to work together soon.
So some people's needs are being met and others are not being met. So when we talk about accessibility in theater or accessible theater, I think we're talking about something that is ever changing and ever fluid. I don't think there's a fixed point. I don't think it's like once we do this and this, we've suddenly become accessible. It's a constantly moving goal. And it's, I think, related to the needs that people bring to the theater. And I include audiences and artists when I'm referring to needs and having needs met.